see yours is going to look better. I look like I was terrified.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rob Quirk with News 5. I want to welcome all of our viewers and our listeners online and on air to our continuing election 2018 coverage here on News 5. We also want to recognize our partners here, the El Pomar Foundation. We are coming to you live from the Garden Pavilion here on the campus of the El Pomar Foundation. Also, we want to extend our thanks to the Gazette, also Colorado Politics. These debates that we've been carrying previously, and now the race for governor being carried online at KOAA.com, Gazette.com, and ColoradoPolitics.com. And again, a terrific night, great opportunity to bring the candidates face-to-face to viewers and listeners across southern Colorado. We want to welcome our two candidates. To my immediate left is Republican candidate for Governor Walker Stapleton. Mr. Stapleton, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
And to his left is the Democratic candidate, Jared Polis. Mr. Polis, good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having us.
I do want to mention before we get started here, please, we had a lot of interruptions during our previous debate, and we know you all support your candidates, but we really are wasting everyone's time by continuing to interrupt with that loud clapping. You know who you support. Let's just keep it down so we can get more questions asked. And let's start right now, shall we? We're going to begin our two panelists, our Joey Bunch with the Gazette and Colorado Politics, and my co-anchor on News 5, Elizabeth Watts. Joey, we're going to start with you, and our first question will be directed to Mr. Polis.
Well, the most important issue Coloradans have identified in this election is health care. And Jared, Walker has characterized your universal health care plan as single payer. Tell me why it's not, why universal care is not single payer.
And first, let me thank the El Pomar Foundation. It's always wonderful to be here in El Paso County. It's been an amazing honor for me to have served 9 years on the Board of Visitors of the Air Force Academy, to have founded Patriot Boot Camp, to help train many veterans to start their own businesses. I'd be, of course, happy to address your question, Joey. Of course, I have a goal of achieving what every other industrialized nation has, and that's universal health care. But as somebody who's met payroll, who's had to pay for health care benefits as a business, and as somebody who's worked legislatively, I understand that what we need to focus on is saving people money on their health care bills today, not tomorrow. Because across the aisle, whether you're Republican or Democratic or Independent, Coloradans are tired of being ripped off. And we should be, because we should be tired of paying 5 to 10 times as much for the exact same prescription drug that's available in Canada or Germany for a fraction of the price. Insulin, which keeps many people alive and healthy, has gone up 1,000% in the last 15 years. Same product, 1,000% greater cost. We're willing to roll up our sleeves and take on the prescription drug companies to end price gouging, to use our leverage in Medicaid and the exchange, and yes, even within states, working with other states to negotiate better rates for prescription drugs, to pass those savings along to Colorado residents. I think we need good ideas from the left, the right, and the center. And what will be my North Star, Joey, is when we have an idea that's being presented, will it reduce costs? Will it expand coverage? And will it maintain or improve quality? If it does, I will get behind it and I will make it happen.
Hey, Jared, if I could ask a follow-up to that, isn't that single payer?
Well, we have a payer nationally called Medicare, which is our largest payer. It covers seniors today, which are our highest cost population. I've long advocated, along with, for instance, Senator Bennett, opening up Medicare as an option for other younger people. I think there's a lot we can do on both the public and private payer side, but fundamentally, we need to save people money. And there's a variety of ways that we can do that with good ideas from conservatives, liberals, and moderates to get it done.
Could you just give us one example? Just give us
Sure.
one example.
Implementing bundled payments within Medicaid like Arkansas has done, which has resulted in 20 to 30% savings to their Medicaid system, allowing for expanded coverage. One more, if I may, pricing transparency to allow the market mechanism to work to bring down rates, because right now it's very secretive who's paying what for whom, with several different payers public and private, paying the different rates for the exact same thing. So for markets to operate, there needs to be competition. We want to see more competition in the provider side of healthcare.
But is that feasible, Jared? I mean, you're one governor in one state, and you're going to have to work with a lot of other states. What's the mechanism that this is going to happen?
Some of the items we can take action on at an executive level, like reconfiguring the pricing regions to address some of the disparities in pricing between western Colorado and the Front Range. Others will need to work with Republicans and Democrats in the legislature on pricing transparency, ending price gouging on prescription drugs. Medicaid bundled payments was implemented by Republican legislatures in Arkansas. We would use that as our model for what we want to do here in Colorado to save money on Medicaid and pass some of those savings along to people who pay for their insurance today.
And I do have one quick follow-up again, and that is that one of the criticisms of this bundling is that there's exclusions, that, you know, some of the extreme care is not a part of the bundling. How do you maintain coverage for all within a bundling system that you've advocated?
So what it basically does is it aligns incentives better. Let's just take the example of pregnancy, because it's a good example. It's also, frankly, a common one that Medicaid often pays for. When you have a pregnancy, if we have a bundled rate for pregnancy, it's the incentive of everybody involved, from the doctor to the provider to the hospital, to do it in the best, most healthy way that decreases complications. If you have providers along the way making additional money from unnecessary C-sections, making additional money from unnecessary amniocentesis, you're creating the wrong incentive structure that not only doesn't result in any better health outcome, but drives up costs in health care.
Thank you very much. Elizabeth, you have a question for Mr. Stapleton, same topic.
Yes, healthcare. Explain the specific costs, logistics, and time frame of your plan to create a task force to improve administration of Medicaid.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I was starting to feel like the kid that was trying to get in the game of catch. Nobody's fallen asleep tonight, given the temperature in here. Thank you very much to El Pomar for having me. I am a proud board member of the El Pomar Metro Council, and it is a fantastic organization for the state of Colorado. I believe we've come out with a health care plan to invest in mental health, to make sure that Medicaid is sustainable for our most vulnerable population, which is young people, even though they only represent about a quarter of the cost. We've talked about ways that young people can have plans with higher deductibles, catastrophic health insurance, where they will pay less for their premiums, because in western Colorado, as many of you know, we have 14 of 64 counties where individuals have one choice of health care provider and where they've had double-digit increases of premiums the last couple of years. I was proud to join a statewide effort with Governor Ritter just a few years ago to defeat a state-run health care proposal. And the reason why we joined forces in a bipartisan way to defeat it is we knew that it would bankrupt Colorado. Congressman Polis is the sponsor of the House bill for universal Medicare, along with Congressman Ellison, which is the House version of Bernie Care. And the thing about Bernie Care is that Bernie Care was tried in Vermont a couple years ago by the Democratic governor. And the idea behind it is that you will replace deductibles, premiums, and copays with taxes. And so the governor of Vermont said the way we're going to pay for this is an 11% corporate tax on all businesses, payroll tax, which Congressman Polis has already said he supports, a payroll tax, and a 10% extra tax on all individuals. And that didn't work out so well, so he had to pull it. Congressman Polis's contemporary, who is the gubernatorial nominee in New Mexico, has said the numbers simply don't work with his universal health care plan. And what would happen is he would double your income taxes, and he would double every business tax, and nobody could afford to live or work in Colorado anymore. And that is an extreme radical plan that won't work for Colorado's young. It won't work for Colorado's old. In fact, the Kaiser Family Foundation has said that his plan will kick 300,000 seniors in Colorado off Medicare. That is not the way forward that we want.
And I just want to follow up on the creation of the task force. Presumably it would be a system whereby you would look at the existing system for Medicaid. Streamlining means what in terms of basically kicking people off these Medicaid rolls with the expansion that we've seen under the Obamacare plan. So please explain how that would work.
Medicaid is the way forward. Medicaid needs to be sustainable for all, and we need to look at all the different government agencies that are involved in Medicaid expansion, which includes HCPF, the Department of Health Services. It includes the healthcare exchange. There are a number of government agencies which play a role in Medicaid expansion. And sometimes when you have a lot of government agencies playing a role in expansion, you get into a bureaucratic turf war. And I would like to review the way HCPUF has administered Medicaid expansion in Colorado to make sure that they're doing it in the most effective manner, that there's not double billing, that there's not fraud, that there's not people that are not being counted. And that will happen through the leadership of a new governor. And we also need to review the exchange, because the exchange has not fulfilled its promise. It's only enrolled about a quarter of the people that it was supposed to. Insurance carriers, major insurance carriers have left the exchange, and premiums have increased more than they should. So I will review all that with all the agencies that are involved in Medicaid expansion to make sure that we can deliver on our promises to Coloradans.
Thank you very much. Going to move on to the next question, a little bit a different topic here. And again, we're going to start with Mr. Walker this time. With the ascension of Justice Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court, it's possible the conservative majority could overturn Roe v. Wade, making abortion an issue to be taken up by individual states. How would you handle such a controversial issue? Where do you stand when it comes to reproductive rights? What would you have the state do? You have a minute and a half.
Well, I've said repeatedly that I will be a pro-life governor. I've also said repeatedly that I accept that Roe versus Wade is the law of the land. When I put my hand on the Bible to enforce and defend the U.S. Constitution, it's not an a la carte offering. You don't get to pick and choose parts of it that you like and you don't like. And I'm not going to speculate on what the future is at the Supreme Court, because the two most recent justices to the Supreme Court wouldn't do so during their hearings. But I will tell you that it's been embedded in Colorado's Constitution since the mid-1990s that taxpayer funds should not be used for abortion-related services. I will make sure that that is the case. Congressman Polis has not said whether he will make sure that that is the case during his time as governor. And I do have a disagreement with Congressman Polis when it comes to allowing a woman to make a decision to abort a baby a minute before the woman is to deliver. To me, that is unconscionable as a father. I think that is extreme in terms of supporting a very, very late-term abortion, and I am not for that. But that's what I will say on the issue. Thank you.
All right, and what a perfect opportunity. Mr. Polis is standing right there. We would like you to respond to what you just heard from Mr. Stapleton, but generally speaking, the issue that could face Colorado as it relates to the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Well, I don't think Walker Stapleton will be able to hide behind the Roe versus Wade precedent if he were governor, which is an important reason that if you care about reproductive rights, if you care about privacy, that we elect a pro-choice governor. And I'm proud to be pro-choice. Not that any of us envy the decision, the horrible decision that a woman might face if she's facing a medical decision or unable to raise a child. But I don't think that should be Walker Stapleton's decision. I don't think that should be my decision. It should be between a woman, her doctor, and God. And I respect a woman's right to make her own informed decision with regard to her reproductive health. And I think we can do more as a state and as a society to reduce abortions by reducing unwanted pregnancies, like increasing the availability of long-acting birth control, LARC, which is a proven track record of reducing unwanted pregnancies, making sure that we have better health education in our schools and empower young women and men to make the right decisions to avoid unwanted pregnancies.
Thank you very much. Next question, Joey Bunch, and if you could direct that to Mr. Polis, please.
Well, it's really the same question for both of you. We have a real problem in this state. One of the biggest problems is transportation. But we don't have a lot of agreement about where the money comes from to pay for it. We've got two issues on the ballot this year. 109 that would take about $260 million a year out of our state budget to pay back $3.5 billion in bonds. But it doesn't come with a tax increase. And then we've got 110 that would raise the state sales tax by 0.62 cents. Which do you support? And if neither one of them pass, where do we get the money to pay for roads and bridges?
First of all, this is a critical issue in southern Colorado as well as across our state, whether it's the gap, whether we're talking about many of our deteriorating rural roads, whether we're talking about access to our mountain communities on Highway 70. I fought to deliver national highway funding to Colorado as a representative of northern Colorado, whether it was the Highway 36 project where we helped get the Tiger grants to help fund it, establishing Highway 70 all the way from Eagle County to Utah as a high priority national freight corridor, open up an additional streams of funding. I know how to make sure that we assemble all the stakeholders to actually get it built and get it done. And that includes the federal government, the state government, local government, often the private sector in terms of support from the business community, and public-private sector partnerships. There's a big difference between how Walker Stapleton and I would handle it. I oppose going deeper into debt without a dedicated funding source. That's what number 109 would do. It would create billions of dollars in debt for our state that taxpayers are responsible for, taking money out of our schools and driving up health care costs, especially in tough budgetary times. I think that if you're going to fund something, you have to figure out how to pay for it up front. The Denver Chamber and others have moved forward with an Initiative 110 that I haven't taken a position on because I've said it's not how I would pay for it, but I respect the efforts of the business community and others to actually pay for infrastructure rather than leave it to you and your kids to pay billions of dollars of debt, as Walker Stapleton's plan would do.
Thank you, Mr.
But Jared,
Stapleton.
if I may here, but how do you pay for it?
Yeah. So as a dedicated funding source, I'm open to building a consensus between the business community, Republicans and Democrats. If you are going to use the sales tax mechanism, I'd like to see a way where we can have some pre-refunding and make sure it doesn't hurt our economy. I think we want to make sure that if you use another mechanism, that it's a stable funding source over time. Another big difference, some of the funding sources that Walker Stapleton has identified and probably will talk about, a gaming tax and marijuana, are completely insufficient for this purpose. Even if our gaming tax produced the same amount of revenue as Nevada, it would take 600 years to fund the current infrastructure deficit in our state. So let's have a real and honest discussion. I believe if you build things, you do need to pay for them. I don't think we need a governor that comes with their own our way or the highway, pardon the pun, for paying for it. But I think the governor needs to make sure that they listen to our local leaders, listen to the business community, and make sure we come up with a plan that meets the needs of our entire state and doesn't leave a legacy of billions of dollars of debt.
Mr. Stapleton, a lot on the plate there to respond to. We'll give we'll give you 2.5 minutes if you need to touch on various accusations that have been made by Mr. Polis.
Well, in order to translate, Congressman Polis saying that he's going to get stakeholders together for consensus building is congressional speak for I haven't the foggiest idea of how to pay for it. And I do. I'm the only candidate in this governor's race that has talked about 4 committed sources of revenue from the general fund. Number 1, I want to take advantage of the windfall, the budget windfall that economists have told Colorado will be more than $1 billion as a result of the federal tax cuts. A couple $100 million are coming into our general fund. All that money should go to roads. None of that money will go to roads under Congressman Polis because he wants to repeal the president's tax plan. Number 2, I've talked about comparing what Colorado spends per mile to about 8 other mountain states. And if we kept our spending in line, which is more transparency and accountability from the Department of Transportation, who the current governor and the last CDOT head conspired to spend $150 million on new offices for bureaucrats while the rest of us sat in traffic. If we had more accountability in budgeting, we could understand why we are spending more per mile than 8 other mountain states. And if we kept it in line, we could have about $150 million more for roads for the future, for bonding for roads. Finally, I've talked about 2 other areas that we should apply to roads. The American Gaming Association has said that legalized sports gambling will be $150 billion in the United States. I'm for taxing it at 15% gross revenues and applying that. And I've also talked about fixing a broken medical marijuana system where it is literally easier. I don't think we're going to repeal marijuana, and I'm glad that CBDs are being reclassified as Schedule I drugs, but it shouldn't be easier for an 18-year-old to get a medical marijuana card than it is for him or her to get a 6-pack of beer. Furthermore, we have many counties in Colorado that have a 50% price disparity between medical and retail or recreational marijuana. That doesn't make any sense to me, because if I had a headache after this debate, which I might have, I'd go to Walgreens and my Advil would be taxed. Some states tax prescription drugs. The feds tax prescription drug imports, and yet marijuana, which counties in the San Luis Valley are dealing with the unintended consequences of legalization, illegal grow operations that are stealing water and electricity. We should at least tax this properly and regulate it properly to keep it out of the hands of 18-year-olds.
And just as a following up on the professional gambling aspect of it, as a practical matter, what do you envision in terms of how long that would actually take to basically start infusing revenue into the state of Colorado, and within that period of time, is a tax hike more preferable or paying off bonds?
No, tax hikes are never more preferable. That's another difference between myself and Congressman Polis. I fought for taxpayers as Treasurer of Colorado. He's been in Washington fighting with Nancy Pelosi 94% of the time for the last decade. The way I envision this working is that Buffalo Wild Wings, Hooters, these are big chains with a lot of money, and they want sports gambling in Colorado. And it's coming because the Supreme Court has said that it can come to Colorado, and I'm for taxing it at 15%. Whether you're placing a bet on the Rockies, the Nuggets, I don't think it will be a deterrent. I think it will be a massive industry, $1 billion plus industry to Colorado, and it will be one of a couple different dedicated sources of revenue I've talked about for bonding for roads for the long term.
Thank you very much.
Walker,
Elizabeth?
I do have another question on transportation. You're a supporter of 109, which would take $260 million a year out of the state budget. Now, we've got that kind of money now because the good times are rolling. But when the good times aren't rolling anymore and the recession comes around and we have to start making cuts, we've still got to pay back those bonds. What gets cut under your plan?
Nothing gets cut, Joey. I'm going to find the money. I'm going to find more dedicated sources of revenue from our general fund, and I'm going to make sure the Department of Transportation operates in a transparent and accountable way that it really hasn't for the last couple of years. All of us as Coloradans, when we invest our money in our roads and bridges, not multimodal transportation like Congressman Polis wants. He wants to invest in underutilized public transit and mountain biking lanes, which are super cool. I have a mountain bike myself, but I think our needs are so acute that we need to invest in roads and bridges and roads. And I will make sure that the department is not wasting money, not hiring contractors that have worked for the department on no-bid contracts, not having people go 3 times the distance they should to work on projects, and I will make sure that we have a department that is accountable and transparent to a new governor.
Mr. Polis, I'll give you a minute to respond to anything you just heard.
Well, yeah, I think what you just heard from Walker is Washington speak for I don't have a plan. So look, and there is a legitimate disagreement for the voters to consider on what we value in infrastructure. And I never heard of a mountain biking lane, I have to say. But what I do value is options for people to choose to get to work. And that means, yes, bus rapid transit, yes, bike lanes. There's a proposal, I have to say. But what I do value is options for people to choose to get to work. And that means, yes, bus rapid transit, yes, bike lanes. There's a proposal being evaluated to see if Front Range Rail is feasible, connecting in with the existing light rail system in Denver and bus system. The more options we have for people through freedom of transportation, the more ways we have to save people money. Right, rather than, and for people who want to operate their vehicles, there's less traffic. So you don't invest in underutilized mass transit, you invest in mass transit that people really want and clamor for, because guess what, that's a great way to get traffic off our roads. Of course, lane expansion plays a role. There's no disagreement on that. But I argue it's not just lane expansion, it's looking at all the different aspects of traffic and how we can make sure that people have additional options to get to work and get to the places in Colorado that they love.
Thank you. Elizabeth, you have the next question, and please direct that towards Mr. Stapleton.
This is actually for both of you.
Okay.
Congressman Polis, you've been endorsed by Bernie Sanders and former President Obama. Mr. Stapleton, this week you were endorsed by President Donald Trump. In previous debates, you've both positioned yourselves as bipartisan coalition builders. So if you're bending to your party's base with these endorsements, how can we expect you to serve the opposing party fairly and say what you want about the polls, but some of them are showing 15 to 20% of voters are undecided. So what would you want to say to them, knowing that they could swing this election and you have these endorsements?
Mr. Stapleton, we'll give you a minute and a half.
Well, I've said repeatedly that I will work with the federal government on policies that make life better for Coloradans. It's why I was one of the earliest supporters of the federal tax plan, which 73% of Coloradans have benefited from, which repealed the individual mandate for health insurance, that 150,000 Coloradans making $50,000 or less had a phantom tax imposed upon them and got no health care in return. And I will stand up for misguided policies that I think are not in Coloradans' best interests. It's why the Farm Bureau endorsed me, because I said long ago I was concerned about escalating tariffs and their impact on Colorado's agriculture community and the $40 billion and 170,000 jobs it provides to Colorado. And I think that that's what Coloradans should expect in a governor, a strong CEO that works to make life better for Coloradans when the federal government proposes things and pushes the federal government away when they have misguided plans. I am delighted that Bernie Sanders chose not to endorse me. And as much as Congressman Polis may want to make this race between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, it's between Walker Stapleton, who for 8 years has fought as the treasurer of Colorado, and Jared Polis, who for 10 years has decided to be in Washington voting with Nancy Pelosi 94% of the time. We have very different plans for the future of Colorado. My plans won't bankrupt Colorado. They will make Colorado the place that all of us want for future generations to come, and we can all do it together. And
so you welcome the endorsement of President Trump?
Yeah, I'm operating a big tent. I would not welcome the endorsement of Bernie Sanders, but President Trump's economic policies have benefited Colorado and will continue to benefit the state of Colorado, and that's why I've supported them. I'm a big believer in economic growth. Congressman Polis wants to repeal the president's tax cuts. He wants to make it harder for individuals to deduct gifts to nonprofits and companies to deduct gifts from nonprofits, and I don't. So we have difference of opinion. But look, the federal government is not going to determine the way forward for healthcare in Colorado. The federal government isn't going to determine the way forward for our roads. They're not going to determine the way forward for our education system. A strong executive leader will, who doesn't waste taxpayer money. And that's what I've done as treasurer, and that's what I'll do as governor.
Mr. Polis, the endorsements first, if you could touch on that. And secondly, the point that Elizabeth made about so many undecided voters right now. What is your message to try and bring them into your camp?
You know, however proud Walker is of not being endorsed by Bernie Sanders, I'm 100 times more proud not to be endorsed by Donald Trump. You know what? And I can work with this president or any president. I've worked, in addition to having started companies, met payroll, started and served as superintendent of a charter school. I've also know enough about politics to be able to know how to get Republicans and Democrats to work together to get things done. I'm proud to sponsor bills to expand renewable energy opportunities on public land with Paul Gosar of Arizona, decreasing the red tape and bureaucracy around siting renewable energy projects on public land. I'm proud to have worked with Doug Lamborn and Scott Tipton on public land issues that affect our quality of life here in Colorado. So I think what's important is that we make sure that we have a governor that isn't beholden to any president, Democrat or Republican. I'll stand up to this president or any president that comes after our Colorado way of life, whether they're supporting policies that increases our cost of health care, whether they're supporting huge special interest tax giveaways to overseas corporations at the expense of Colorado families. You know I'll always stand with Colorado families.
Thank you very much. Let's move to education, and this is for both gentlemen here, and it's a two-part question I'm going to start with, and this goes first to Mr. Polis. Amendment 73 would put $1.6 billion in K through 12 education by raising the corporate tax rate and income tax on higher earners. Do you support or oppose that? And if not, what's your plan to put significant dollars into public education here in Colorado? You have a minute and a half, Mr. Polis.
I have not endorsed Amendment 73. I know there's a lot of teachers and others that are fighting for it. I would prefer that we have the flexibility, meaning we do something in statute rather than our Constitution. But I think we need a governor who's ready to build the coalition to end decades of underinvestment in our public schools and make sure that every child has access to preschool and kindergarten. And of course, we have a plan to pay for it, working with representatives like Jim Wilson, Republican, who's long championed free kindergarten. We can use general fund money and use social impact bonds, which pay for preschool and kindergarten out of future savings. There's a school district in Colorado, Westminster School District, that's done that today, that Walker is familiar with. We look forward to being one of the first states that to implement this as a statewide model. Utah is also looking at that as well. I've been proud to have supported mill levies and bonds in various parts of our state, including hard to fund parts. And we need to take a hard look at our education finance, not just the overall levels, but we need to make sure we streamline the system and make sure more money reaches the classroom instead of going to bureaucracy and administrators. And we also need to address inequities in this distribution system between different districts. School districts, fire districts, and other special districts are also affected by the downward pressure of Gallagher, an artificial ratio between commercial and residential property intake. We need to do what we can to, yes, evoke the legitimate frustration of voters that they want to see some control and property taxes and that you're able to afford to live where you live, but also something that doesn't depend on whether your economy in your area is more residential than commercial.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stapleton, again, Amendment 73, its proposed infusion of cash into K through 12, income tax on higher earners. Where do you stand? Do you support or oppose this? And if you do oppose it, where are you looking at in terms of primary funding for significant education improvements?
Thank you. I oppose it. As a father of 3 school-aged kids, 10, 7, and 4, I want to make sure that the money we're investing in education goes into the classroom. We've been asked this question at a number of debates, and Congressman Polis never says whether he's for it or against it. He just says something like, I won't endorse it now. What does that mean? I thought it was a yes or no question. The answer is no. He is promoting the idea of free preschool, and I'm the dad of a preschool-age daughter, and I want to make sure that if we're going to make that promise, that we can pay for it. That's about $1 billion promise that would eat up most of the money from Amendment 73. And so you would think that he would then support Amendment 73, but he refuses, I guess, to support it. Look, we did an analysis across our 178 school districts in Colorado to make sure that we're putting Colorado kids first and delivering on our promise to young people. And what we found was really alarming. What we found is since 2011, the number of students has increased by about 6%, the number of teachers by about 8%, and administrative costs by 35%. In some school districts, we have great transparency and accountability for understanding where dollars are going. And in other school districts, we have no transparency. I believe that as governor, I will ask the Department of Education to have complete transparency across all of our school districts so that all of us who are collectively, as Coloradans, investors in the future of public education can understand why dollars are not flowing in some school districts into the classroom where they belong, and so we can incentivize school districts, not in a punitive way, to actually make sure that administrative costs are kept in check with student and teacher growth. Because in some school districts, if we had done this, we would have close to $4,000 more to pay teachers. Thank you.
I want to, I'll give you an opportunity, Mr. Polis, to respond. You have a minute, sir.
Look, I'm the father of a 4-year-old preschooler as well. Walker and I can afford preschool for our kids. Why should our kids start out at an advantage over families that can't? That's not our values. That's not fair. Oklahoma has preschool and kindergarten for every kid. If I'm elected governor, I'll make it a priority to get it done here in Colorado. It's not just an educational issue. When we know how important those early education years are for kids to get a strong start, it's also a real-life affordability issue for young families. If we care about making our communities more livable, if we care about the high cost of housing, you talk to any young family with a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, the high cost of daycare are preventing them from buying homes close to where they work, putting more traffic on the roads, forcing people to live with their grandparents and parents, and preventing even many young families from making the decision to have kids. We can get it done here in Colorado, working with Democrats, Republicans, the business community, and educators, and it'll improve the quality of life not only for the next generation, but for parents and grandparents today, because I know my parents appreciate having the kids 2 days a week, but it would really be imposing on them to take those kids 5 or 6 days a week.
Mr. Stapleton, do you want to respond quickly?
Yeah, this all sounds great, but as all of us know, there are no free lunches in life, and free is really expensive. And the reason Congressman Polis won't level with you tonight and tell you about how to pay for any of his plans is that he knows how to pay for them. I know how to pay for them because I've been the treasurer of Colorado for the last 8 years. And guess what? Here's the bad news. The only way to pay for them is by doubling your personal income taxes. That's his health care plan alone, so maybe tripling. Or else doubling taxes on all businesses, which would make it really hard for Pizza Hut or Merrill Lynch to do business in Colorado anymore. That is not the Colorado that puts Coloradans first. That's a Colorado that saddles us with debt and unfulfilled government promises. And that's not a Colorado I want for my kids or for yours.
Just a quick response on that. As Walker Stapleton knows, the governor and the legislature have no ability to raise taxes in our state. It's only up to the people of Colorado. You need a governor that's a creative problem solver, that doesn't always think like Walker Stapleton does, I'm going to increase your taxes. I'm going to do more with what we have, look at public-private financing mechanisms, and make sure that we do the most with what we have before we ask for a dime more.
Let's talk about more with what we have, and I know that a big discussion point for a lot of people is school safety, where it comes in terms of the spending priorities. Mr. Polis, first, you have 1 minute. Talk about the priority you would put on school security, and in particular, armed guards at every school in Colorado, and is that something you support, and is that something that Colorado voters need to be paying for as we reconfigure perhaps some of the upper echelon of the education system?
Well, as the father of a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, this obviously hits close to home. First, I support some of the measures that Colorado's already taken. For instance, our universal background check law that we passed 4 years ago, has resulted in 1,200 guns that were not sold to criminals as a result without inconveniencing legal gun owners in our state. Walker Stapleton has said he would repeal that universal background checks law. I support it because that's 1,200 criminals that could be coming not just to your home but potentially to your kid's school as well. I think as we look at physical infrastructure, we need to look at single point entry and better physical security of our campuses. We need to have a conversation to encourage partnerships with school resource officers and others. I don't see this so much as a spending priority as a priority of working with school districts to make sure that kids have access to better mental health counseling on campus, referrals if they need it. We need a red flag law in our state that provides a way to put a temporary mental health hold if a child or anybody is going through a mental health crisis on temporarily losing access to their guns until they've recovered. These are things that we can move forward on that'll help improve not only school safety, but all of our safety here in Colorado.
Mr. Stapleton, your response to the proposal of security, safety, spending priorities.
Well, there is nothing that is more important. The worst tragedy that I could ever imagine, or that my wife could ever imagine ensuing, is sending our kid off to school, and we have 3 grade school age children, and having a tragedy of unspeakable proportions take place. And it is why I've called for practical steps that we can all take as Coloradans to ensure our schools are safe. I've talked about, I will prioritize it so we have a public safety officer in every single school in Colorado that is trained. I will make sure that we have metal detectors in every single school. Just because we have a single point of entry doesn't mean we have to have a single point of exiting. I will make sure that the doctors and mental health professionals that have clients who are a danger to themselves or to their communities have fulfilled their obligations as medical professionals to report those individuals to law enforcement. And yet, if you look at a lot of the mass shootings that have taken place, there has been a systemic failure to do so. But what I won't do is pass municipal gun restrictions like Congressman Polis will that are not even enforceable because the ATF has not clarified weapons at the federal level. This is a misguided government regulation that will not result in less gun violence and will take away people's Second Amendment rights.
Thank you. We're going to move to Joey Bunch, who has the next question, and if you could direct that to Mr. Stapleton.
All right. Walker, your energy plan focuses almost entirely on fossil fuels, yet you say you want to transition to renewable energy. What's your timetable for that? How does that happen?
Well, Joey, you know, I was having lunch last week with an individual who was 55, and he said, you know, the year I was born, fossil fuels represented 83% of the world's energy production. And then I went off to MIT, and during my time at MIT, when I studied as an engineer and a geologist, I was told that during the course of my life, fossil fuels would be largely eradicated. Now I'm 55, and fossil fuels represent 83% of the world's energy production. Furthermore, we've invested approximately $1.3 trillion globally on renewables, and they still represent less than 3% of the world's energy production. I am the only candidate in the governor's race who has an all-of-the-above approach to energy. I'm for wind, I'm for solar, I'm for natural gas, and I'm for oil. But unlike Congressman Polis, I am not for unfunded mandates on the lives of Coloradans who can afford it the least. Because if you talk to energy experts, they will tell you, whether it be Black Hills in Pueblo or Excel in the metro area, that once you get to a 65 or 70% renewables, we don't have the capacity. Because as much as all of us would like it, the sun isn't shining 24/7 and the wind isn't blowing. And so what happens is the capital that gets invested gets returned to the Coloradans who can afford it the least, and they pay more to heat their homes in winter and turn on the lights year-round. That is not the Colorado I want, with skyrocketing utility bills and Big Brother in government telling me how to heat my home and turn on my lights. But that is exactly the type of radical extreme energy policy that Congressman Polis will bring to Colorado as your next governor, should he win.
I want to follow up on that point. I think most people see renewable energy in our future. But are you saying that's a private market problem, not a government solution?
No, we already have federal subsidies for solar, and they're coming up for renewal in the next couple of years. So it's not clear to me what's going to happen to the future of federal subsidies. We have a state tax credit program for renewables, and I support that. But I support the market deciding and the consumer deciding what energy works most efficiently and effectively for them, not government telling me how to heat my home and how to turn on the lights at night.
Well,
especially if I'm paying more than I did in the past for my utility bills. And that's what every Coloradan will do. Make no mistake, Jared Polis's renewable plan, independent economists have said, will cost Colorado $45 billion. Our budget is $30 billion, $45 billion. And the people that will pay that the most are the hardworking middle-class Coloradans who will see their utility bills go through the freaking roof. Okay, and I don't want that to happen.
All right, well, I want Mr. Polis to answer these accusations. Mr. Polis, please.
I don't want the oil and gas companies telling you what light bulbs to use and whether to turn off your lights on and off either. And you know what? As Walker Stapleton knows, all these expensive programs he's talking about are not my plan. When that proposal came out, you know I've never supported a 100% renewable energy portfolio standard. Not once during the primary, during the general. Neither did any of the Democrats. Neither do mainstream environmental groups. He's doing something that politicians do in debates. He's attacking a straw man.
So you haven't said 100% renewable by 2040? Is that correct?
Look, absolutely. Absolutely, and we're not using any type of top-down mandate to get there. When John F. Kennedy said in 1961, we're going to get to the moon by the end of the decade, it wasn't a mandate, it was a goal. And he didn't say we're going to get 75% of the way to the moon or 80% of the way to the moon. He said we're going to get to the darn moon, and you know what? America did. And you know what? We deserve cleaner air. And we need to act on climate for our farmers and for our ski industry. And we deserve better rates for ratepayers, which are all of you, which is why Pueblo, Colorado was one of the first cities in the country to announce a goal of 100% renewable energy by 2030, and I declared my candidacy there in support of that. Xcel Energy will tell you today that new wind energy costs 20% less than existing coal energy. So the sooner we make this transition, not only will it improve our health, because of cleaner air. Not only will it do our part on climate, but it'll save all of us money because the utilities will invest in cleaner renewable energy through the PUC, through making sure that we have lower financing costs for home solar by PACE increment financing, by removing burdens from siting renewable energy projects on public land and reducing bureaucracy and red tape. Yes, we can get there, just as John F. Kennedy said we could get to the moon.
Well, I want to ask a follow-up question. I think you and Walker have found an agreement here, because I think Walker's solution seems to be private market, but yours does too. You say that it's a goal, not a mandate, and it's going to be ground up. I don't see your plan in that equation anywhere.
I would love to have Walker Stapleton endorse my specific proposals to get there, like having PACE financing for home solar, with a senior lien allowing a financing rate of 3 or 4% rather than 9% for home solar, and having a reserve fund to comply with Freddie and Fannie financing requirements. I would love to see Walker Stapleton support my efforts to reduce red tape and bureaucracy around siting renewable energy projects on public land. I would love to see Walker Stapleton support my efforts for state energy performance contracting and passing those results along to ratepayers. I would love to see Walker Stapleton appoint who I want to appoint to the Public Utilities Commission. But I don't think we're going to see that today, because his radical agenda of propping up and subsidizing oil and gas at your expense will simply increase rates in Colorado, and contribute to the costly climate change, which we've already seen recent projections is already costing Colorado families money.
Mr. Stapleton, you have a minute to respond to that.
Well, Congressman, in order for me to agree with your plan, I would have to disagree with Governor Hickenlooper, who said that your energy plan was pretty radical. I would have to disagree with Governor Hickenlooper,
He never said that.
Who begged, yes, he did.
And he supports me, by the way, not you.
He absolutely did. He called your plan pretty radical. In addition to that, he had to beg and plead with you 3 years ago when you personally financed a 2,000-foot setback that would have had the same drastic impact on Colorado's economy as this 2,500-foot setback. If you talk to small or medium-sized operators, it would crush 230,000 jobs and take $32 billion out of Colorado's economy. It would take the largest recurring revenue source we have for water conservation efforts. It would take $1 billion from schools. It would take money from cities. It would crush Colorado's economy, destroy jobs, and we would never get them back, Congressman. And we can't have that for Colorado's future.
All right, we're going to move on. All right, please. We're going to move on. Elizabeth, you have the next question. Go ahead.
This is for both of you.
Yes.
What would your administration advocate as it relates to the growing trade war?
And we're going to begin with Mr. Stapleton this time. You have a minute and a half, sir. Growing trade war.
Well, here's it. The trade war is something that I'm concerned about. It's why during my earliest days as a candidate, I talked about the problems of escalating tariffs, especially with respect to what happens to meat exports in Colorado, where we have approximately $600 million of meat exports going to China. And I talked about an escalating trade war with China being bad for Colorado's meat producers like Swift in northern Colorado. It's why I met repeatedly with the farmers and ranchers across Colorado, and why the Colorado Farm Bureau, which contributes $40 billion and 170,000 jobs, endorsed me. Because I heard from farmers and ranchers that we're seeing variations in the price of wheat and corn that were not helpful. And I think that if the administration is going to engage in trade negotiations, and by the way, I think President Trump has done a good job in reaching a better agreement with Canada and Mexico than we have ever had in the past. And I want to make sure that the federal government has an end game in sight. I wasn't a big fan of what happened with the subsidies, and I said so a long time ago. I want to make sure, and the farmers and ranchers want to make sure, that the temporary pain that they have to endure is for long-term gain. And that's what I will do. I will be a governor that advocates for farmers and ranchers and the future of Colorado's ag community, and the Farm Bureau knows it, and that's why they've endorsed me for governor. Mr.
Polis, you have a minute and a half. Same question.
To me, like a lot of things, it's about making the future work for Colorado families. We came from the discussion of energy. I believe in good green jobs that can never be outsourced. There's 600 jobs at Vestas and Pueblo today, building the renewable energy economy, manufacturing wind turbines, making sure that global trade works for Colorado residents, for farmers, for manufacturers, for inventors and owners of intellectual property is absolutely critical. And I believe that we do that best by working together through a rules-based system. I was proud to work with President Obama on expanding opportunities for marketing grown in Colorado products in East Asia. And of course, I stand up to President Trump on any of even the short-term pain that he's causing our farmers and our ranchers here in Colorado today. We need to have a governor that looks to open and expand markets, that believes in making this concept and this trend of globalization actually work to improve our quality of life rather than be something that makes Coloradans or any country suffer. I believe that we're better working together. When you have trade, it's a willing, consensual transaction between two partners, both of whom benefit from that transaction. That's the very economic definition of trade. Trade is beneficial. I will work tirelessly and take on any president who wants to close off markets or make Colorado farmers or manufacturers suffer.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time. We want to get a couple more questions in. This time, the Me Too movement. Let's talk about. The issue has roiled the state capitol again this week. Representative Jovan Melton found this week to have had 2 allegations of domestic violence in his past, pleaded guilty to 1. Mr. Polis, you said he should look in the mirror, make a decision on whether to retire. If you were looking in that mirror in his circumstance, what would you do and why?
Well, look, I think we need to treat all allegations of domestic abuse very seriously. We are a people that believe in both redemption and consequences. And it's that very moral issue that as people of faith, we wrestle with every day. To say, yes, if you've done something wrong, as Jovan Melton did, and you've paid your debts to society and served your sentence, should you ever be able to run for public office? Well, you know what? We do believe in redemption. When you've served your term, you can run, and it's up to you, in this case Javon Melton, to explain to the people of his district whether he's fully come to terms with his past and whether that informs his passion for fighting for the victims of domestic violence and others in the future. So I think it's something that ultimately is in the hands of the voters where it belongs, and each of us will always struggle as individuals and as humans to reconcile that, yes, we're a people that believe in consequences, and yes, we're a people that believe in redemption.
Mr. Stapleton, we have seen these allegations on both sides at the state capitol. We saw the legislature take some action to try and improve the policing and the accountability as far as these sexual assault allegations are concerned. How do you see the culture at the state capitol now with these types of changes being implemented? What more needs to be done in your view?
Well, in Representative Melton's case, we have documented proof. He pled guilty to a criminal offense. I'm not quite sure why this didn't come to light during earlier years of his service, but to me, it's a black and white issue. It's not a gray issue as it appears to be for Congressman Polis. As a father of a 7-year-old and 4-year-old girl and the husband to a wife, there is a zero tolerance policy for domestic violence to women in any way, shape, or form, ever. This is domestic violence. This is a criminal offense, which Representative Melton pled guilty to, and he should be excused from the legislature. And I will hold Republicans to the exact same standard. We have a no tolerance policy for this, and we should expect nothing more as Coloradans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Joey, our next question.
Well, I mean, the governor's the titular leader of our state. What leadership can each of you show in moving us past this moment to bridge the divide in the Me Too movement and between men and women in general? What can you do?
Mr. Polis, take that question first, sir. You have a minute and a half.
Well, I think it's first of all important to make sure that we have a workplace that's free of any type of harassment based on gender or not, a place where men and women are empowered to be able to be themselves and to be able to work to the maximum of their abilities and succeed to their maximum abilities. The truth are, there are still great disparities in our state. And when you look at the tremendous progress that women have made, you look, for instance, at the computer science program at CSU or CU, and you still see that in some of these high-paying fields, it's predominantly men. We need to make sure that we integrate science, technology, engineering, and math at earlier ages, and I look forward to working with great resources like the National Council for Women in Technology to make sure that we can achieve parity in high-paying fields. Access to capital for women and minorities remains a detriment to entrepreneurs who want to form their own businesses. When I started Patriot Boot Camp 6 years ago to help veterans and military spouses start their own business, we made sure that we serve a lot of minorities and women, military spouses, both women who have served, as well as the spouses of men who have served, by empowering them with the mentorship, the connections, the access to capital, to allow them to succeed. Because while we've made great progress in our state and our country, I think that the fundamental aspect of much of what's going on is the existing imbalance in the power relationship, yes, between men and women, between people of color and white people, and we need to do more to make sure that everybody has the opportunity not just to get by, but to thrive in the Colorado we love.
Mr. Stapleton?
Well, I'm outnumbered in my house. I have three women that I live with each and every day, one son, and a female dog. So, and my youngest daughter said to me recently, "Daddy, I want to be an astronaut." And I said, absolutely. You need to shoot for the stars. And all of young Colorado women need to have their hopes and dreams recognized. And I'm going to be a governor that makes sure that that happens. It starts with equal pay in the workplace. It starts with enforcing that. It starts with Colorado recognizing family leave and supporting the federal government's family leave policies. And it starts with respecting women at home, in the workplace, and not being tolerant of women not being heard. And that is why in the case of Representative Melton, where he has been convicted of domestic violence, there shouldn't be a gray area, Congressman Polis. You should either say that he should stay or he should go. It's not it's a yes or no question.
Well, you know, Walker,
and I say that he should go, and you say it's a gray area because you're really good at triangulating on a lot of things that really negatively impact people's lives. And I'm going to tell it to you straight. I'm going to say yes or no. I'm going to tell you how to pay for stuff. I'm not going to make promises of the sun, moon, and stars and deliver nothing but dirt under your feet. That's not leadership. That is empty government promises. That is saddling our state with debt that we can't afford, and it's making the lives of Coloradans more difficult, including my 2 young daughters and my wife.
Mr. Polis, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Walker Stapleton is the only one here who supports a ballot initiative that would saddle his kids and my kids with over $3 billion of debt. I oppose Initiative 109. I have fought nationally in support of a bipartisan balanced budget amendment. I'm one of just a handful of Democrats that wants to require Congress to balance our budget. I've met payroll, I've built businesses from the ground up, and we need to make sure that there's an intergenerational aspect to this equity as well, and that we don't party today and have the hangover for my kids and Walker's kids.
30 seconds.
I did take a couple math classes in college and happen to have an MBA, Jared, and just doing the quick math, you're saying that I'm proposing $3 billion of debt, but your costs and plans are $90 billion. So 90 minus the 3 that I promised means you still need to come up with, you're still $87 billion short. Which is almost 3 times the size of our entire state budget. So you are, sir, the all-star captain of debt. You were as a congressman and you will be as governor.
Again, I support actually paying for things, unlike borrowing from our future to pay for things today.
All right, we're going to end it there. Gentlemen, thank you very much. An hour sure goes fast. Not a lot of time for questions. We did flip a coin before we began here this evening as far as the closing statement is concerned. Each of the candidates have 2 minutes to speak. And Walker Stapleton, you go first, and you have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much for having me tonight to El Pomar and Colorado Springs. It has been the honor of my life to serve as the treasurer of Colorado. I am running for governor for my 3 kids, Craig, Colette, and Olivia, and all of Colorado's kids to make sure we have abundant economic opportunity. But not just them. I'm working for a hardworking grandmother who has 2 jobs, who recently got $2,000 more in her pocket as a result of the federal tax cut. I'm working for a mother in western Colorado whose child has a specialty medicine that costs $10,000 every couple of months, and she has to drive her daughter long distances. I'm working for an individual in Pueblo who is paying more than he ever paid in his electric bills to heat his home in wintertime. And I am working on Coloradans every day who want to see more money in the classroom and less administrative bloat. None of this will be possible if Congressman Polis becomes the next governor, because his radical extreme agenda will not put Coloradans first. He wants to repeal the tax cut and take that $2,000 away from the grandmother. He wants to make sure that people pay more for their electricity and more to heat their homes year-round. He wants to cause rural doctors that my friend is seeing in western Colorado to be even in greater shortage because he will pay them less with his health care plan. This is not a Colorado that is compassionate. It is not a Colorado that puts Coloradans first. It is a Colorado that saddles us with massive government debt and empty promises, which makes it harder for us to live the Colorado way of life. It is a promise that threatens and jeopardizes all of the lives that we want to lead as Coloradans, where we want the government out of our lives so that we can recognize our hopes and dreams as Coloradans together. Thank you so much for having me tonight, and I ask for your vote.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Polis, you have 2 minutes, sir.
You'll notice that often when Walker Stapleton talks, it's noun, verb, Jared Polis, noun, verb, Jared Polis. He talks more about what my plans are not than what his plans are. I'm here to tell you what my plans are. First of all, my plan is to save your family money on taxes. This state has over $1.6 billion of special interest tax giveaways. I would work with the legislature to cut those in half and reduce the income tax rate you pay and businesses pay by 3 to 5% so you could have more money left in your pocket by the end of the month rather than the high-priced Denver lobbyists. We're spending too much on health care in Colorado, and whether you're a Republican or Democrat, you should be upset and, in fact, fired up that you're paying 5 to 8 to 10 times as much for the exact same prescription drug that's available in Canada, or even at the VA, which is allowed to negotiate for prescription drug rates and often pays 30 to 50% less. I will do everything as governor not to spend more on health care, like Walker Stapleton talks about, but for us to spend less on health care, because we're already paying too darn much. and we have a plan to get it done. You can read about it at polisforcolorado.com. And yes, I'm excited to challenge Colorado to be one of the very first states to achieve 100% renewable energy. We have great wind and solar resources in our state. Wind energy saves people money today, and there's good green jobs right here in Colorado that can never be outsourced, and we can be truly independent right here in Colorado and even be more of an energy exporter than we are today. And yes, we need to make sure that every child gets a strong start. As the father of a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, and as somebody who's been a superintendent of a charter school and who's chaired our State Board of Education, I've worked with Republicans and Democrats to make sure that we work together, to make sure the resources reach the classroom, that we make sure that we have qualified educational professionals and pay them well enough and give them small enough class sizes to do their job well, and make sure that every kid not only has access to preschool and kindergarten, but access to affordable higher education through apprenticeships, vocational training, and yes, 4-year college for many. I'm Jared Polis, and I'd be honored to have your support in the upcoming election.
Jared Polis, thank you very much. Dr. Stapleton, thank you. Also want to take this opportunity to thank the Gazette, Colorado Politics, of course, Joey Bunch, Elizabeth Watts, thank you for your role here tonight. Thanks to all of you who showed up, and of course our online viewers and on KOAA 5. Again, ballots go out next week. Be a part of the solution, everybody. You have until the 29th to register in order to get a paper ballot. And then, of course, you can register on the day of the election, November 6th. Please, turn out the vote. Let's make a difference. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rob Quirk. Until next time, we're always watching out for you.